When you think about getting older, do you think you'll be less capable, less attractive, out of touch, irrelevant? Well, guess what? Those beliefs don't just bruise your ego, they negatively affect your biology, raising inflammation, spiking cortisol, and even impact your heart, memory, and ability to recover. Today, I'm joined by Andrea Nakayama, a functional nutritionist, founder and former CEO of the Functional Nutrition Alliance, and narrative medicine practitioner. And yes, we'll cover what that means. She has helped thousands of people step into the role of CEO of their own bodies. Today, we're discussing the science of beliefs about aging, the power of mindset in midlife, and how reframing aging as adaptation and emergence can literally change how your body functions. You're going to want to hear this. Hello, my friend, and welcome to the Belong Wellness Podcast. I am your host, Jessica Long. I am a health coach specializing in perimenopause, a longtime fitness instructor, mama of two littles, and a wife. If you are a midlife woman wondering what the actual F is going on with your hormones, your emotions, your relationships, your career, and your life in general, then you belong here. Join me each week as I share my own personal stories of how I navigate this wild stage of life. I also bring in experts and fellow badass midlifers to share their incredible stories of career pivots, managing relationships, parenting, living a healthy lifestyle, and much more. So listen, if midlife has you feeling like you're just not yourself anymore and alone in the chaos, this podcast is for you. Grab your giant water bottle, snap on your weighted vest, and let's get to it. Before we jump into today's episode, just a quick reminder that I am not a licensed medical care provider and do not provide medical services or advice. The information shared in this podcast is meant to be educational, not prescriptive. Please consult your medical doctor before making any changes to your diet or lifestyle. Also, the opinions of guests on this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Jessica or anyone affiliated with Belong Wellness. So, negative beliefs about aging are everywhere. You're not capable anymore physically or mentally. You're not beautiful. You don't understand the times. You're not current, so therefore you're irrelevant. And what we may not realize is that these beliefs can have a negative impact on our physical health. I'm very intrigued to dive into this today and learn more about this. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Andrea.
I'm so excited to be here with you, Jessica. Thank you.
Well, I want to talk a tiny bit about your background and the medicine that you practice, which you call narrative medicine, which I just think is such a cool term, and I've never heard that before. So I know you've built your career around functional medicine, ultimately empowering people with information and tools so that they really feel and believe that they are the CEOs of their own bodies. And you've been applying this to people with chronic conditions for many years and are now starting to apply this to aging and longevity. But first of all, I just have to ask, what is narrative medicine? Did you come up with that term?
No.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So, I'm just going to back up for a moment and say, when I talk about functional medicine, there's a little mantra that I have, which is everything is connected. We are all unique and all things matter. And the way I think about that, and I'm pointing to different areas if anybody's watching, because I have actually a functional nutrition matrix where we can see everything in the body is connected. We know the gut's connected to the brain. We know the detoxification organs, the liver and the kidneys are connected to the gut. That's connected to our hormones. Everything in our body is connected. We are all unique is what I like to think of as the story. Where are we? Who are we? Whose is it that's coming to this equation of what's going on in our body? And then I have the skills. So I call it the story, the soup, and the skills. And that's everything is connected is the soup inside us. We are all unique is that story. And then all things matter is the skills. So I just wanted to presence that because what I found that led me to narrative medicine, to answer your question, is that we got very fixated on the soup and the skills. So when I started in practice in functional medicine nutrition, everything was about the skills. What do I do? What do I take? What am I supposed to eat? It was very, very focused on when do I sleep? What's the right way to sleep? What's the right timing to eat? What's the right diet? Then we got hyper fixated on the soup. What's going on with my mitochondria? What's happening with my cortisol, my hormones? All of these things in our body became hyper. There was a hyper focus in media and social media. And what I realized is there was a whole piece of the equation that was missing, which was our story. And so I kind of went on this quest for how does our story, our narrative, our antecedents, triggers, and mediators, as we call them in functional medicine, impact our physiological terrain and our skills, what it is we're going to do. So I went on this quest. Where is it that anybody is talking about this connection? And I found my way to the practice of narrative medicine. It's a fairly new modality. It was born probably a little over 20 years ago. Dr. Rita Sharon, who's a medical doctor and a literary scholar, really founded it, and she is the grandmother of the program at Columbia University, where I studied. And it really invites us to slow down and understand not just the narrative we tell ourselves, but the kind of little threads that are part of who we lose when we're in this quest to constantly fix ourselves. And so that practice led me to a lot of the ways that I'm jumping off with that study to look at how do beliefs impact us? How does being moved impact us? How do these little things that we experience every day actually impact our physiological terrain, maybe as much as the supplements we're taking or the diet we're trying to follow or the exercise that we're doing? That was a long answer, but I wanted to take us through the narrative of my journey.
I appreciate that. And I think anyone who has felt strong emotions is going to believe that there's a connection between how we process information, how we see the world, how we show up in the world, how we feel, that's going to affect us physically. It makes sense. But then there kind of is this disconnect. We don't know how to quantify it, right? Like, how does being sad show up on my health markers? So I want to talk to you about that today. And let's frame this with the aging that we talked about. So these negative beliefs about aging, which are everywhere. And even before we hit record, I said, a lot of my listeners are in their 40s. A lot of them aren't even comfortable with the term midlife yet. Well, that right there is a negative perception of aging that I didn't even really think about until I said it. But you shared this really interesting study with me from, I think it was Becca Levy at Yale, that showed that people with positive self-perceptions of aging live on average 7.5 years longer. And so first of all, without getting too scientific-y and nerdy, I do have to know, how was this study designed so that she could hold other variables constant and actually come to that conclusion?
Yeah, really interesting. She is a psychologist and epidemiologist out of Yale. She wrote the book called Breaking the Age Code. And she's done a lot of social science studies. So we don't necessarily get to think about all the different factors, like how are those people eating or how are we working in a controlled environment. What they did was go into an area in Ohio, and it was a longitudinal study where they talked to people about their beliefs about aging and then came back over time. And so they were tracking the beliefs in relation to potential outcomes. And that's more of a logical study or psychological study versus what we can do in a controlled environment where we know what time they're going to bed and what they're eating and if they're smoking or drinking. So it's more of that social context. And what she found, that average of 7.5 years, is one of her most profound areas of study, kind of the thing that she's known for. But she really has done a lot of research to show where it does impact our biological terrain when we have negative beliefs.
And so how does it impact us physically?
So when we think about negative beliefs about aging, and I think you just said it right there, like we have a lot of fear around being midlife or not being relevant anymore. Our roles changing. I'm 59, my son is 24 and recently moved to Tokyo. So, even the role of being a mother has changed significantly, and I had to face that reality and have the discord in myself of, wait a minute, that role is changed, and realizing that all roles change as we age, because we live in a society that also kind of spits us out as we age, has certain beliefs about us. So what Becca Levy found, and there's also another researcher out of Harvard named Ellen Langer who wrote a book called The Mindful Body that's also really beautiful about how mindset impacts our bodies as we age. What they both found is that when we have these negative messages, and they're not just self-talk, it's society's messages towards us, they impact our immune and inflammatory markers. So our C-reactive protein, which is an inflammatory marker, is impacted. It impacts our cortisol because we have fear and we're trying to fix and quest for the ways in which we can make sure we're not aging. It impacts our heart and our cardiovascular system. So there's a number of physiological systems that also lead to symptoms that keep us in that sympathetic dominant fight or flight state to be looking for the solutions to fix our aging.
So it's one more of those things that's keeping us in fight or flight all the time.
Yes, exactly.
There's so many things that are doing that: work, relationships, and now this too. So you did mention some of it is self-talk and some of it is coming from our culture. What do we do about what's coming from our culture? I mean, we can talk about the self-talk part because I think we might at least feel like we have more control over that. But how do we control for the messages that we're getting from society about this?
I think control is an operative word that we maybe need to release a little bit and think about influence. And I really want to point out the impact of epigenetic factors. So the factors that influence our genes are the ones that surround us. They are food and movement and environment and mindset. And one thing I really liked about those two books, and I can anchor on all these books because I'm actually leading a longevity book club right now called The Long View, where I'm reading a book every 2 weeks and basically doing the reading so others don't have to, but then leading a discussion around it. But Ellen Langer's book, The Mindful Body, is really talking about that mindset that we have that's internalized, whereas Becca Levy, as a psychologist and epidemiologist, is looking at society and how we take that in. So to answer your question, I think there's different things that I've learned that really help me flip the script. And one of them from Becca Levy is just noticing, calling it out, making sure that we are bringing it to our awareness when it happens, assigning blame, where does that come from, and then consciously making a shift. So as an example, when I was in the book club session, one of the participants who's in her early 50s said, I'm 53, but I feel like I'm 30. And I was like, is that a statement that we could actually reframe to say, I feel like I'm 53, which to me feels like 30? Like when we're saying I feel 30, but I'm 53, are we putting positivity on the 30 and negativity on the 53? So just noticing where it comes up. It's all around us. You know, I stopped dyeing my hair at a certain point because I was like, I get to be the elder in this field. I'm going to own it. I'm going to own it. Yeah. But just that idea that when we hear ourselves saying, well, I'm not going to be attractive anymore if this or if that. And it doesn't mean we don't take care of ourselves. It means we're recognizing where we are actually contributing to a culture that prizes youth and demonizes aging, which isn't true of every culture, but is true of ours.
That's exactly right. And I've been thinking a lot about that because I think a lot of it comes down to the choices that we make in what we consume. I've been thinking about this so much because since last November, I decided to go on a little bit of a news media cleanse, actually more than a little bit, where I used to scroll through my news app on Apple all the time, like multiple times a day. And now I listen to the top of the news hour on NPR when I'm brushing my teeth. And that's pretty much it. I let some headlines pop up on my phone, but I almost never click through. And that's me choosing what works for me and what makes me feel good. I don't want to be an ostrich. I'm not going to stick my head in the sand and be unaware of what's going on. I need to be aware, especially if I'm a voter. But I only need to take in what I really need to make decisions for myself. And I think the same thing is true here. Like, I don't need to be consuming the media that is reinforcing these messages about anti-aging. I don't even like that term.
Right.
Or making us feel bad about getting older. So that's, I think, one example of a choice that we can make
It's
to
beautiful. Kudos to
keep
you.
that society message at bay.
Yes.
And then we can choose to have podcasts for midlife women where we talk about things like this, right?
Yes.
But even just the conversations that we have with our friends, like what are we saying? What language are we using when we're talking in groups with our peers? And, a lot of these changes start at that level.
Yes, and also just noticing how we feel about women who may be older than us. Like, where are we celebrating the role models? Where is the kind of portfolio, Becca Levy calls it, like Jane Goodall or Terry Gross? Or like, who are we looking at that are the people who we hold up as those who have succeeded into late age? Toni Morrison, a lot of people were authors later in life, were successful later in life, and we can hold them up as our role models and celebrate them, so we have a portfolio of what we're moving into instead of what we typically do with media, which is inundate ourselves with the portfolio of youth.
Exactly. And I'm thinking today's my mom's birthday as we're recording this, and you can take your own mom or your aunts or older friends of yours, same thing, and make it a little more personal. So that's the society side. What about the self-talk side? What can we do to improve that?
Yeah, so this was really interesting for me in reading Ellen Langer's book, The Mindful Body, because I tend to have a little bit of a bristly response to mindset as a functional medicine nutrition. Like, I know mindset matters, but I anchor on the science, and I always struggled with when I go into narrative medicine, but I'm not a mindset coach. Like, that's not what I do, right? So I've struggled with the notion of mindset and where it fits, and I felt like she gave me a whole new perspective on how to think about our self-talk. And she gives an example that she calls 3 levels of thinking. The first level of thinking is just taking what is. We're not actually analyzing it or thinking about it. We're just saying, well, I'm getting older. That's what's going to happen. The second one may be, this is what that means, and we take the negative thinking. The third level of thinking is what she calls mindful multiplicity. And I love that because it opens up what is possible. So it means we're questioning, we're having these kinds of conversations, we're engaging in the dialogue and the community that helps us to open up, wait a minute, what can aging look like? What can this thing in my health that I'm experiencing look like other than the story I'm telling myself? So I'm just going to give you a personal example. Like I said, I'm 59. Take really good care of myself. Knock on wood, I'm lucky to have the privilege to be able to do all the things I do. And my hips did get an osteo diagnosis recently, and I think this is true of more and more women. And I do all the things I can do. Yes, I can lift heavier, and I'm starting to, I take the supplements, I do the things. But that solution to me, the one thing that gets fed to me is you need to go on bioidentical hormones. Now, I just want to say here, I am not against bioidentical hormones. I think they are a brilliant and beautiful thing. I think there's a problem in the way they're being used today, and I'm happy to talk about that. There's a lot of nuance to it. I personally do not feel good on bioidentical hormones. I'm very sensitive, and there's a lot of reasons I can go into why that might not be the case for me. But what I had to open up for myself is that's not the only solution. There can be other ways to support my bone regeneration and my strength so that I'm not at risk of falling. And then I can embrace that mindful multiplicity and open doors instead of being like, this means that, that's what has to happen, and that's all I have available to me. No, there's so many different ways that we can explore what our health means when we have the support to be able to do so.
Exactly. And this is reminding me of what you said in the very beginning, which is we sometimes seek, like, just tell me how much I should sleep. Tell me when I should go to bed. Tell me what my bedtime routine should be. Tell me what I should be eating because we just want easy answers. But it doesn't work that way because, to your point, we are very interconnected, holistic beings, and everybody has a unique story. Everybody has a different set of genes. Everybody processes emotions differently, like, all matters. So there's never just one answer for everyone. But now that you've cracked open Pandora's box, I have to know, like, what are your thoughts on bioidentical hormones? And tell me more.
Yeah, so I think that we're living in a menopause and perimenopause industrial complex. We're being sold all the solutions. The world is booming right now with what we're being sold because we are also a population of buyers. Perimenopause, menopause, postmenopausal women. We are the ones that have the expendable income, presumably, to be able to seek all these things and pay attention and do all the things. So just being aware that everybody's selling us their promised solution is something to, I think, bring to our collective consciousness. This is also true of the longevity industrial complex. There's a lot of science and technology today around how we hack longevity, and we're being sold a lot of promises that are part of capitalism, not necessarily part of health. So really just being aware of what's happening there, I think, is important. And also recognizing, going back to the negative talk, that all of those fixes are part of a ideal that is telling us that menopause, aging are decline, that they are decline and decline is bad. And again, I want to point to other cultures where elders are revered and they're not necessarily masking their aging with hormone therapies. They are becoming the wise women in their culture, and that is upheld and really cherished. So when we think about bioidenticals, I think we just have to realize when and why am I doing the hormones, and recognizing that it may not be the fix we think it is. So when I look through a functional nutrition lens, the way I think about hormones, and I'm holding my hands up in a little pyramid for those that can't see, our blood sugar is at the base of that pyramid, and then our insulin, and then our cortisol, and then our thyroid hormones, and then our sex hormones. If we are taking sex hormones exogenously, coming from the outside in, without that understanding of what supports our hormones, we're building on quicksand. On top of that, our hormones need to be metabolized. So we need to create them, transport them, utilize them, and excrete them. So if we're not sleeping, we're not pooping, and our blood sugar isn't balanced, we are again building on quicksand, and we may be adding to our toxic load of hormones as opposed to supporting the hormones doing what they need to do. So before I'm inserting hormones into the picture in a clinical situation, I'm always making sure that somebody's sleeping, they're pooping, and their blood sugar is balanced, because we want to build on a solid foundation. And I'm starting very low and going slow. I'm not a prescriber of hormones, but if I'm working with someone who is working with a prescriber, I'm helping them to understand and track so they can be on the lowest dose possible, and in some instances, singulars instead of multiples of different hormones, so we can see what works for you. Unfortunately, that's not the way that hormones are being prescribed today. There's often not testing. There's often not an understanding of the metabolization, meaning we got to get rid of those hormones or they cause problems. And there's often not a calibration for the individual. It's what does the paper say, what does the evidence say is the right amount, which may not be the right amount for your body or my body. So I hope that was a big picture. I am for them, depending on the person, the body, and the methodology in which they're being introduced.
And we've heard so many times, or at least I have, that hormones don't even work that well for you unless you're actually working on your lifestyle,
Yes.
your nutrition.
Exactly.
Understanding blood sugar, I think, is finally kind of bubbling up into the mainstream, and midlife women are finally taking note and understanding. But yeah, I do I do agree that it just feeds into the whole issue in our culture, which is we just want to take a pill and make it all better and make all the symptoms go away. And this is really, it's an art and a science, and it's
Yes.
very complicated and it's very individual, but agreed that the lifestyle and nutrition really have to be dialed first and foremost, even if you want to take hormones, because they're going to work so much better for you if you
Especially.
do. And you
Especially.
might be able to feel so much better even without them if you can
Correct.
dial in some of that stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that what you're saying there about the body is like incredibly complex, but what I want to tell listeners is your self-care doesn't need to be. So when I say we need to balance our blood sugar, what I'm talking about is fat, fiber, protein at every meal or snack. Don't measure it. You don't need to measure your blood sugar. Like there's a time and a place for a continuous glucose monitor or measuring your blood sugar, but it's not necessary for most of us. And I think this is another place where we're being sold something that isn't necessarily the right thing for our bodies. Fat, fiber, protein at every meal or snack. Clock how you feel. That's your first step. That could save you a lot of time, a lot of angst, a lot of money, if you just slow it down and do self-care as opposed to seeking all these things.
Well, thank you for pointing that out, because I think blood sugar does sound just big and scary and just like, what does that even mean? I don't know where to start. How would I even know? I don't want to wear a continuous glucose monitor. I mean, so even that alone is a barrier to try to make any effort. But yeah, agreed. Protein, fat, and fiber, that's kind of been my little mantra for years now. And if you just look at your plate, you kind of know what portion sizes you need to make you feel good. Is there protein on your plate? Is there healthy fat? Is there fiber? Great, check. Good.
Yep, and you don't need to measure your
No.
protein. You don't need to just know you have the protein, fat, and fiber, and understanding like good quality or what works for you. I've seen so many people trying to increase their protein intake and then eating foods that don't work for their body because they're trying to get certain grams. Let that all go. It's just part of the incessant diet culture that we are also exposed to all the time that tells us not to feel good about ourselves. And I do have to drop in that I recently read a really interesting study that continuous glucose monitors work well for people who are diabetic, but for people who are pre-diabetic or have normal glucose, that the information we're getting both from a hemoglobin A1C, the long-term lab marker, and continuous glucose monitors are not actually relevant to what's going on with their blood sugar. So what works in one population isn't necessarily working in other populations.
Well, isn't that interesting? So that's another rabbit hole I want to go down. Okay, I gotta keep us on track here. I do want to circle back to the negative beliefs about aging, how that's affecting our physical health. And I just have to ask, is there a self-fulfilling prophecy that's happening here? Because if we have these negative beliefs about aging, are we therefore consciously or unconsciously going to kind of stop taking care of ourselves and almost make that happen? And then is the reverse also true? Like if we actually believe that we will age gracefully, or whatever word you want to use to describe it, that we will then take better care of ourselves?
And I'm going to relate this back to the blood sugar piece just to kind of
Please do.
tell a study that in Ellen Langer's book, she did some research that showed that people who got a hemoglobin A1C marker that was 5.6 or 5.7, one tells you you're pre-diabetic, that 5.7, one tells you you're not. And what she's saying is you ask any endocrinologist and there's no difference between those two markers, except one's going to tell the patient that they're pre-diabetic and the other one isn't. And those two people could be reversed the next day. But the one who gets the label that they're pre-diabetic is more likely to get diabetes over time than the one who didn't get the label of pre-diabetes. Again, they're the same. There's no difference between them, except exactly what you said, Jessica. The person who got the label they may try the things, they then feel it's like, Sisyphus, this is too hard, I'm destined, I'm already pre-diabetic, I'm going to get diabetes. Ultimately, they do at a much higher rate. So this too is true of our beliefs around aging. When we believe that aging is negative, that it's all downhill, not only do we not take the same care of ourselves, that belief gets under our skin. We actually metabolize that belief and live into it, as opposed to the reality that we can shapeshift that belief system and think about those positive age models, what is still to come in life, how can this be a positive for me, which then does also create its own self-fulfilling prophecy of purpose and meaning and making meaning as we age.
That's so interesting because I'm just thinking psychologically, we just don't like to be wrong.
Right.
So we're going to make sure that we're right.
Yes.
Or we don't want to
point.
not believe the diagnosis. I mean, okay, I do want to caveat this that probably most of the time we should believe a diagnosis that we're given. But this is really relevant for midlife women because this pre-diabetic diagnosis is coming up more and more as our blood sugar, very commonly at this stage of life, it gets more dysregulated. Our cortisol gets more dysregulated. Insulin is off. So this pre-diabetic diagnosis is actually coming up quite a bit for midlife women. So that's a relevant example that you give.
So many diagnoses, because Jessica, what you're saying is we should believe a diagnosis when we get it, but we're actually putting a lot of things in the bucket of diagnosis that aren't actually diagnoses. So prediabetes might be something like, is it actually a diagnosis or is it not a diagnosis? But even with our hormones, if we look at adrenal fatigue, if we look at a lot of fancy functional lab tests, which may have their time and place, but people are over-identifying with things that may not actually be a diagnosis and then living that reality. I'm estrogen dominant. I have adrenal fatigue. These aren't standard diagnoses. These are things that are clues, but we are living them as if they're diagnoses.
Is this true for perimenopause too?
Yes. I mean, there's shifts that are happening, but it's not a diagnosis.
So I am not perimenopause. I've been learning to say that instead of saying I am anxious, which is labeling myself as the emotion. It's I'm feeling anxious. So I am not perimenopause. My body's experiencing hormonal fluctuations.
Beautiful. Absolutely. And that's one of the initial things that got me into this work when my late husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and I realized conventional medicine calls him his diagnosis. He is a glioblastoma. He's not a person who has a glioblastoma. And that was one of the first things that kind of woke me up to wait a minute, that's not true. And then realizing that everybody with the same diagnosis is treated the same, which goes back to the industrial complex we're talking about. I am perimenopausal. That means I need these supplements, that thing, this tracker. That's what we're fed because we believe we have a diagnosis. And a lot of diagnoses, not only the ones that don't fall into the diagnostic realm, but a lot of things we call diagnoses might be really different if you go to two different providers. A lot of cancer diagnoses, a lot of autoimmune diagnoses, they're constellations that lead to the diagnostic criteria. So all for the medical system, not here to disparage it. I think it's just recognizing limitations and that self-talk.
This has got the wheels turning right now. I'm going to have to be thinking about my self-talk around perimenopause. I mean, I kind of know what it is around aging, and I'm being more careful with that recently. But perimenopause, I don't think I have been that careful with it. I think I've been saying I'm perimenopausal, and that's why all these symptoms are happening. And of course they're happening. And of course I got a new symptom this week. And I mean, and it's not like I don't take control of my life either. I take very good care of myself. I do all the lifestyle things I can think of. My nutrition, I've been eating to balance my blood sugar for years and feel great. But there is some of it the weight gain comes on anyway. And I'm like, what else could I possibly be doing? And I think in that sense, from a mindset, I'm kind of throwing my hands up in the air as if this is just me instead of not having such a negative perception of it.
Yeah, and it's that mindful multiplicity, right? Going back to that term, which again, I don't know why it kind of cracked something open for me, that mindfulness is actually bringing mindfulness to possibility and not closing things down. That mindfulness isn't mindfulling our way out of pain or out of challenges or symptoms, which I think that's where I always had this like, it's not just about being grateful. You can't like gratitude your way out of a diagnosis. That's extreme. But that idea that it could mean different things, even though this thing could be a negative in my life, what are the positives I can learn from it? And not going down this singular path that I'm gaining the weight because I'm perimenopausal or whatever it is that we're telling ourselves.
And that is epigenetics right there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So if we can have a more positive frame around it, then even if we have the genes that might predispose us to, I'm just going to use this example again, weight gain in perimenopause, yes. If we're not, I don't know, just so willingly throwing our hands up and saying, well, okay, that's just going to happen, and actually more focused on all of the positive things around us without sounding too corny, that we can probably help manage that a little bit. Is that fair to say?
I think so. And I think it's really about noticing what arises in us around these things where we just want to mask it, or we just want it to go away, or it's annoying. We are aging, but there are life changes. There's changes in our relationships. There's changes in our work situation. There's changes around us. Really feeling into them. And I tell my son, again, he's 24, and I tell him that my whole longevity pursuit happened because I realized he didn't need me anymore. And that was really challenging for me to face. He's choosing me, but he doesn't need me. And that means I did a good job, not a bad job. But it felt like a bad job to begin with, that like he was needing to push me away to take flight on his own. And that I had to sit with the discomfort. And I think that's the example I'm bringing up here. It can happen as headaches or lack of sleep or weight gain or breakouts when we haven't had them in a long time, or changes in our elimination, all of the things that can happen. When we sit with it, it's like, wait a second, what is this telling me? What is there in this new feeling for me to understand, metabolize, and not try to just mask and put away? And through that, if I use that relationship as an example, there's a beautiful thing that comes from it because I'm aware. I'm not just trying to cover my discomfort. And that awareness, whether it's a physical symptom or a psychological symptom, I think brings us so much opportunity.
Totally agree. And that's always the first step. And that's a big one. Sometimes that's as far as I get. And that's okay. Okay. So for anyone who's listening, who's thinking, all right, I've got definitely some negative beliefs about aging or perimenopause or whatever situation they might be finding themselves in, would you recommend that she tries to start with mindset shifts or nutrition and lifestyle changes? What would you suggest that she do?
I think it depends on where you are. So like I said, everything is connected. We are all unique and all things matter. As a functional medicine nutritionist, I'd be remiss if I didn't say sleep, poop, blood sugar balance, those are number one, even for our mindsets. Like, it is hard to shift our mindset if we're not sleeping, if we're not taking care of the rest and relaxation and coming into that parasympathetic dominant state. Parasympathetic, rest and digest. Sympathetic, fight or flight. So being able to get to that place where we're caring for our sleep, making sure we're eliminating. Blood sugar can even come later, but if you're starting fat, fiber, protein, those are the places where I just feel like once we're settled there, we have a lot more of the nervous system regulation to take on, wait a minute, I'm thinking about this in a way that I can shift. It's hard to take on mindset. If our vessel is feeling discomfort, so I'm going to always say sleep, poop, blood sugar balance, and you don't need to do all of them at once. If you're saying, you know what, I hear this, I'm going to work on my sleep. And what time am I going to bed? How do I feel when I go to bed? Do I wake up in the middle of the night? Do I wake up feeling rested? And start playing with some different things, whether it's going to bed a little earlier, unplugging like you have before you go to bed, setting up an environment that's dark and restful before you go to bed. Just track and look and listen. Sleep is so incredibly important. And if one night doesn't work, you just try again the next night. And there's so much opportunity that comes from our restfulness that I can't speak more highly about it for our hormones, for our mindset, for all the things.
Totally agree. It's much easier to make healthier, quote unquote, decisions when you're feeling rested and calm.
Yes.
So I totally agree that sleep is the place to start always. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about aging that you wish we could just toss in the compost bin right now?
Yeah, I think some of what we think of as decline, like our memory, is not actually decline. There are shifts in our memory that happen over time. And calling out another great author, Daniel Levitin, who's a neuroscientist who wrote the book Successful Aging. He talks about different kinds of memory. And I feel like we tell ourselves something about memory that's related to the memory of a youthful person. As we age, we have more in our account to remember, and we use our memory very differently. We're making patterns from all we're learning instead of just recounting things. So our episodic memory may change while our semantic memory doesn't. It actually increases, which is why we see professors or lawyers or judges who are older and still revered for what they do. And I'm talking, of course, here about non-pathological memory loss. There is pathological neurodegeneration, but we tend to lump a lot in there. So I think that's a really good example of where we're calling something out as a problem that's just a shift of the aging brain. A baby is going to use memory different than a 20 or 30-year-old, different than a 70 or 80-year-old. And that doesn't mean it's a problem because it looks different. So I think that is a takeaway that I would say with everything. Is it bad because it looks different than youth, or is it different? Period.
I like looking at it like we have a bigger bank. Your bank account
bank.
is bigger,
Yes.
so there's a positive self-perception of aging.
Yes, your bank account's bigger and you're able to make more associations. Just
Yeah.
how cool.
Very cool. All right, good. We're going to end on that note. Thank you so much for your time today. Where can everybody find you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, you can find me at Andrea Nakayama in all the places on the web at Andrea Nakayama, and on LinkedIn and Instagram. Andrea Nakayama is where to go.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. This was a really fun conversation.
Thanks, Jessica.
Okay, here are 3 key takeaways from my conversation with Andrea. 1, your beliefs are biology. How you think about aging can directly influence inflammation, cortisol, heart health, memory, and even recovery. 2, the foundation matters. Make sure you have a good handle on the basics: sleep, poop, and blood sugar balance. These are what set you up for success. 3, aging isn't decline, it's adaptation, integration, and emergence. The more we shift our language and self-talk, the more our bodies respond in kind. If this episode made you rethink how you relate to aging or helped you feel more in charge of your midlife health, please take a minute to leave a quick rating and review on Apple or a comment on Spotify. Your positive reviews help me bring on more high-level guests like Andrea, who can share evidence-based insights on how to optimize midlife. Until next time, take care of yourself and your beliefs.